The other thing that's definitely taken a lot, and this is item 2 of our 5 outs segment now, being that the Warriors, of course, were very interested. And there's plenty of reporting from myself and others that Utah prioritized Brandon Pajemski, the sophomore guard that is projected to start for Golden State this season, instead of Jonathan Kuminga as like the quote unquote blue chip prospect back. And what I want to say to that is this is the item 2 of our 5 out here. I think that is just as much of the extension numbers that Jonathan Kuminga would like than it is about anything that these two guys have done on the floor. Pods is going to be entering year 2 of a 4-year rookie deal. Jonathan Kuminga is entering the final year of his rookie deal, where the word around the league from various sources is that Kuminga and his representation are looking for a full max extension, which, as we just talked about with BI and Jamal Murray and whoever, like if you're not absolute all-star Scotty Barnes type of guy for Toronto, Larry Markkinen for Utah, Trae Young for Atlanta back in the day, because look at what happened to Trae Young in Atlanta since then. It's really hard to get that number. And that's what the agent has to do in that scenario. That's what we're going to talk about an item. And I'll bring it up now too. Like in Atlanta, item 3 of our 5 out, that, according to my information, is what Jalen Johnson is hoping for with the Hawks in his extension, and what Clutch Sports should be asking for as well. Like that's just what good agenting is. But to bring us back to Golden State, like the numbers that run underneath all these team building decisions, a lot of them are accounting for money that's going to be coming onto your books in the future, and how do we prepare ourselves for that now while still maintaining our competitiveness on the floor today. And so for Golden State, like Kuminga was their 3rd best player last year behind Draymond and Steph. I think that's pretty objective. And on both sides of the floor, he took massive, massive strides come the turn of the calendar, where he had like a whole stretch of 20-point games in a row and all that type of stuff. And they are trusting him more in that pinch post spot to give him opportunities to play make out of there. But there's no way he's proven to Golden State personnel that he's worth that money right now. He definitely hasn't proven it to Utah. And if you're trading Larry Markkinen for someone like him, knowing that he wants that, you kind of have to be willing to pay it. And I think that was a big piece of this puzzle that I don't know if has been fully illustrated and underscored to this point.
I just find myself thinking it's clear that the Warriors haven't seen what they would need to see to be comfortable making that kind of commitment, or they're not seeing what they want on a baseline level in terms of how to operate within Steve Kerr's system or whatever, because they just haven't given Kuminga the keys really in that way, right?
Or made the playoffs and have him been in like a real winning, or been a winning team. Like sure, their record, like whatever, like they could have in the East, blah blah blah, but like they just haven't been there yet because of his play.
And that manifested last season in some boiling over into the public eye of frustrations with Kuminga. So basically, the reporting being that he was eager for some kind of change, either to start or something.
Yeah, and that's been smoothed over though. Like I will say that happened like mid-January, I think, early January. By trade deadline time, when I was following Golden State for the weekend, I sat down with him. Like him and Kerr had a really good man-to-man, eye-to-eye conversation that like definitely a big point of that was, hey, let's handle this stuff in-house instead of leaking that to the press. And I think overall, like there's a general positive arrow on Jonathan Kuminga within the walls of Golden State, just not positive to the point of that type of money yet.
Right. To here's $50 million a year or $40 million a year or whatever it will wind up being. At some point there needs to be a decision of, are we in on this or are we not in on this? Right. And if they are not comfortable with whatever the number is going to wind up being for him, and he's not comfortable with whatever the number is that they are comfortable with, a pretty simple line to draw is like, well, then what is the market for Jonathan Kuminga out there in the world? And I think that's if what we're hearing out of Utah is we'd rather, and it makes sense from a cost control perspective, you don't have to make that decision on Brandon Podziemski yet, yada, yada, yada. If it's like, well, we view Podziemski as a higher end asset because of that control, these years of control, and Kuminga being closer to where he's going to get paid, where that place is for him, I think is a really interesting question, because I think there's a lot of teams that have, combo fours that they like a lot. And there aren't as many of those where, like you could have it would have made sense at some point to be like, well, maybe you draw a line from him to Indiana, but then they went and they got Pascal Siakam and they,
which they
signed him.
That was definitely a thing that was discussed back 2023, 23, when they picked Jarris Walker and they were there. Like that was definitely a conversation that was had.
But in any event, so Kuminga's an interesting guy because you see the flashes. You've seen now a more extended run of production, but what the price point winds up being and who winds up being interested in footing that bill, I think will be something worth keeping an eye on, because this is all unfolding in an environment where Klay Thompson just walked out the door. Steph Curry, you are playing with the last few years of Steph Curry's prime. There's the Draymond Green question moving forward. Like there's a lot of stuff still to get figured out in Golden State. And Kuminga seems like he's going to be a pretty big part of that.
Yeah, and he'll get to play out this whole year. He'll get to go to restricted free agency. This is not to, spell doomsday and illustrate this as like a massive staring contest and, issues to come. It's early. And just like in Atlanta with Jalen Johnson, like the Hawks made basically everyone available for trade since February besides him.
Except him, right?
So like, of course you're going to be thinking, well, then pay me that way. But the guy has had his own injury history, hasn't put together a full season yet. For all the promise that made me want to fly down to Atlanta and profile him, and you can read a really, vulnerable story on yahoosports.com from him talking about all of his mental health issues that he had at Duke during COVID and what have you. Like, it's going to be a prove-it year in terms of dollar figure for him as well in this new iteration where they put Dyson Daniels in the spot of DeJounte Murray, and they incorporate the number one pick in this draft of the Wemby wave, Zachary Rissache, and they try to figure out where Atlanta can find themselves somewhere between, the Orlandos and I can't even put the Indianas because they made the fucking Eastern Conference Finals, but the Orlandos and the other teams that have been in that 7 to 11 muck, not the Washingtons, not the Charlottes, that type, not the Detroits. Like, can Atlanta figure out an identity that is successful? How much of that Jalen Johnson is responsible for will absolutely directly result in his dollar figure that he comes to, just like Kuminga's as well.